My name is Gail Fisher Stewart, and I am an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Washington. But priesthood is fairly recent. For most of my adult life, I've been involved in policing, criminal justice, either as an active police officer, retiring with the rank of captain in 1992, or a consultant to police departments, local governments, and federal agencies, or teaching criminal justice at the university level. So for over 40 years, I've been involved in this thing called American policing. And I have to admit, right now, I am taking my lead from James Baldwin, who, when assessing America's relationship with racism, said that while he loved America, he had an obligation to criticize her. For me, policing has been good. It has afforded a standard of living that I've taken into retirement. But like Baldwin, I have an obligation. I have a right. I have a responsibility to critique American policing, particularly as it relates to how the police interact with people who look like me. I come to this point of my life, and I have to admit, I am afraid. I am afraid for my brother, my son, my nephews, and the male relatives of my friends as we continue to see the killing of unarmed black men in America by those who have sworn to serve and protect us. As one young man said last night at a program at the Washington National Cathedral, he's afraid because all the police see is a 6'7" nappy haired black man. That it doesn't matter that he attends a prestigious private school or that he comes from a two-parent family. All the police see is a black man, and with that identification, he can lose his life. I'm also concerned for black police officers because when they are off duty, out of uniform, in their private vehicles, and just by chance stop by one of their fellow officers, they also invite death by engaging in furtive movements, attempting to quickly retrieve their police credentials to show the police that they are, in fact, one of the family. We know that undercover or plainclothes work is dangerous for black police officers. They've been confused for the bad guy who is black, and these officers have been killed or injured. I am afraid for all police officers because there is a fringe in our society that is not concerned about anyone but themselves and would feel no remorse using the breach between the police and the black community as a reason to justify killing police officers. I come to this point in my life when I have to say that we who follow a crucified and risen Lord can no longer live under a cloud of cheap grace that allows us to turn our heads because we are not personally affected. If we follow a marginalized Jew who lived in occupied territory, who spoke out against the oppression that his people were facing, and was lynched because he threatened those in power, he threatened the status quo and was lynched. He was crucified for the crime of calling out injustice. He received the penalty of capital punishment. If we are to follow him, then we too must face our cross. We must take a risk and call out injustice wherever it is found, knowing that there will be blowback, there will be consequences. But we must do this whatever the cost. There's a quote on the library wall at Virginia Theological Seminary that says, "Seek the truth, come whence it may, cost what it will." We are being called to tell the truth of how American policing came to be. It is a risk that we must take. Changing American policing, changing the culture of American policing, is a civil and human rights issue for the 21st century. But this issue of police excessive force is not new. It is not a 21st, 20th, or 19th century phenomenon. In the Gospel of John, Jesus has been arrested and is taken before the high priest, who questions him about his teachings and his disciples. And Jesus answers, but apparently it was one of those uppity, you don't know your place answers, because in John 18 and 22, in the New Revised Standard Version, we read, "When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, 'Is this how you answer the high priest?'" Jesus didn't know his place. So even Jesus was the victim of police excessive force and then the victim of state-sanctioned murder. We've taken the horror, we've taken the injustice out of the cross, which was Roman capital punishment. We want to get to the resurrection without spending time with the injustice that led to the cross. Sometimes we who wear the cross must lose all for the sake of the other. We are called to put our very lives on the line. Now, to be fair, and I want to be fair, given the number of contacts the police have with the public over the course of a year, which has to be millions of contacts, the number that results in death, in words of researchers, would be statistically insignificant. According to some sources, as of September 20th of this year, 720 people have been killed by the police, and this includes all races. However, as a person of faith, I have to believe that even one death of someone created by and in the image of God, one life unjustly taken, has to be significant to God. Because when we kill, when human beings kill, we put ourselves on the level of God. We kill what God has created. And before someone says, yes, but what about black on black crime? I ask you not to create a distraction at this point. Crime in America is a problem, and most crime is interracial. And we don't talk about white on white crime. But any life taken is a sin, and it needs to be addressed. However, right now, I'm dealing with black people being killed by the police because I have nephews who are 8 years old and younger, and I really don't want them to grow up afraid of the police, and I don't want the police to be afraid of them. So to the latest killings in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Terrence Crutcher walking with his hands up back to his disabled vehicle, a motorist in need of assistance. He is tased and shot to death, and I have to ask how a motorist in need of assistance ends up dead. In the audio from the police helicopter, voices are heard saying, and one of those voices is the husband of the female officer who killed Mr. Crutcher. We hear a voice saying, "Have to taser that thing." That thing? How do you dehumanize someone? And another voice is heard saying, "That looks like a bad dude too." Based on what evidence can you come up to those conclusions? That a man, a human being, is a thing and looks like a bad dude. I mean, he's walking back to his disabled vehicle with his hands up. He is in need of assistance, and that need resulted in his death. But it is all too easy to kill a thing, an object. Policing dehumanizes people. In the second case, in Charlotte, the police were looking for someone wanted on outstanding warrants and happened across Keith Lamont Scott, who was not the person the police were after. But right now, I don't have enough information concerning whether he was carrying a gun or reading a book. All I know is that another black man is dead at the hands of the police, and civil disorder has broken out. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the riot is the voice of the unheard. We need to listen to those who are calling for change, who are calling for accountability. And remember, there are those on the fringe who care less about Mr. Scott and will take advantage of the situation. But I do know that walking while black, running while black, having car troubles while black, reading while black, selling Lucy's or CDs while black, hell, living while black, can have disastrous, deadly consequences. And something must be done before we become numb to the deaths of black men at the hands of the police who seem to be able to escape accountability. As if black lives don't matter. Just one less black person to have to deal with taking up space, taking up white space, showing America how she has not lived up to her promise of liberty and justice for all. That liberty and justice for all in America is a lie. And if policing is going to change, if the police culture is going to change, that change will have to come from those who know policing, who know the culture, because we are a part of it. Right now, change just might have to come from those who are retired, because we can't be held accountable for violations of departmental orders, and the statute of limitations has run out on the other violations. We have to be willing to say change is not a word that the police adjust to easily, that the police are to maintain the status quo, and that in this country the status quo is a racialized society, and that racism is a defining characteristic of policing in America. Just look at the videos of the civil rights struggle. On which side were the police? They were not attempting to ensure equal rights for everyone or anyone. No, they were beating up, arresting people, killing people who were just trying to live into the freedom that God wanted for them. When people are fighting for human rights, the police tend to be on the side of the status quo. Those of us who joined policing in the late 60s and early 70s came up in an era when it was admitted that the police and the community, particularly communities of color, were on opposite sides. We witnessed the long, hot summer when cities burned and the civil disorder after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, it was acknowledged then within law enforcement itself that the police had or have an us versus them mentality. The whole push to bring people of color and women on police departments was to lessen the racial tension that existed. Those of us who entered policing during the late 60s and early 70s had to take department-sponsored courses on race relations, racial sensitivity, and human relations. Later, these courses morphed into cultural relations, cultural diversity, cultural sensitivity, multicultural relations, cultural bias, and awareness training. And now it is implicit bias training. And in none of these courses did we ever deal with the white community, the white culture. Community policing was developed to lessen the tension between communities of color and the police. White communities have always had community policing. They get the policing they demand. They pick up the phone and the police respond. Those of us who are honest will admit that policing is different in white, well-resourced communities than it is in black and poor communities. And it will continue to be that way until the truth is told. There have been calls for the culture of policing to change for at least the past 50 years, and still little has changed. I remember my first day on the street after graduating from the academy. My training officer was white, and it was in the days when the police could legally conduct random traffic stops. No reason was needed, not even a pretext reason. So after riding around for 4 hours in the shotgun seat, it was finally my turn to drive. And so I picked a car at random to stop. My training officer asked me why I stopped the car, and I answered, because. He then said, "We don't stop white people." We don't stop white people? Really? Fool, do you see who's in the seat beside you? You're telling me that we only stop people who look like me? I got my entry into racialized policing from the very start, and throughout my career, my eyes were open to any and all forms of injustice inside the department and in our communities. But I will admit, I will confess that I did things I should not have done. I treated people, particularly people of color, disrespectfully because I had been infected with the virus that is American policing. But when the scales of injustice were lifted from my eyes, I repented. I realized that I treated people who looked like me in a way that I would not treat a white person, and something was wrong with that picture. But we must ask, what is being taught to rookie officers by their training officers on how to interact and police black people? What stereotypes, what prejudices and biases are being passed on to those who enter policing today? The police are supposed to be guardians. Instead, they are warriors going into battle, wearing BDUs, battle dress uniforms. When you go into the community with a warrior mentality, ready for battle, you look for an enemy. And since the beginning of policing in America, the enemy, the threat to white society has been black people, and in particular, the black man. The peace officer part of policing has been lost, if it ever was there. It is not the rotten apples, the bad officers, the so-called bad officers, that we must fear, because eventually they will do something to get themselves fired. We must fear, and it might sound odd, the decent officer who came to policing to serve, to help the community. These officers are soon infected with the virus of American policing. The police culture, its people, artifacts, argot, that's the language, traditions, and values, infects those who join policing, who want to do good, and end up doing something insane. And so the total blame for what we are seeing cannot be placed on the individual police officers. In Spike Lee's movie X, the movie about Malcolm X, there is a scene when Malcolm, played by Denzel Washington, is addressing the people of Harlem on the white man, and he says, "Oh, I say, and I say it again, you've been had, you've been took, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. To those in blue who raise their hands to serve and protect, I say to you, oh, I say, and I say it again, you've been had, you've been took, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, you run amok. You joined the police department of your choice because you wanted to make a difference. You wanted to serve your community. You wanted to give back to the community. But this community policing thing is a farce when your evaluation is based on arrests, tickets, and citations. You are between a rock and a hard place. At the end of a tour of duty, your sergeant doesn't ask how many pickup basketball games you played with the children, or how many hands you shook, or how many double dutch tournaments you organized, or how many food baskets you delivered, or how many senior citizens you checked on. I mean, that's for the community relations people. And not you. I mean, you, after all, are the real police. You lock up people. And in this whole discussion of Black Lives Matter since the death of Michael Brown and the call for the police to change, I have to ask, where are the voices of the National Police Chief Associations out in the public square? Are they willing to admit that the virus of racism has infected their people? And are they willing to lead the way for change? Of course, these issues are discussed when they meet behind closed doors. But where are their voices in the public square calling for change? There must first be confession before there can ever be repentance. I mean, chiefs know what is happening in their department. They know because they too are part of the system. They are part of the culture. And if they are honest, they will admit that they have done things, treated people in ways that were not respectful, not humane. And that dehumanization, that disrespect continues today, where black men are presumed to be guilty first, to be presumed to be criminal first, to be a thing. To black police chiefs, you are not immune. Your badge and your rank will not protect you. You are black in a racialized America. We who are retired are going to have to call for change until those who are currently serving are courageous enough to step forward, to risk everything to see that policing changes into what it should be. There have been enough papers and studies and research and pilot projects. It is now time for action. Our future and the lives of our children are at stake.